George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Hell no, we won't go lock up your sons, your daughters, and I suppose these days your in-betweeners. The conscription call-up papers are in the post. Who do you think you're kidding, Mr. Sanders? Well, we're promised 4 wars in the next few years by no less than the British Defence Secretary. So we can't fight that with an armed forces that would comfortably fit in to Villa Park in Birmingham. And Donald Trump rampages on like a bull elephant through the bush. He crushes DeSantis and then crushes Haley, whose biggest funder has just turned off the tap. So the Dems have now got a decision to make. Do they jail their number one and only opponent in the presidential battles to come? And will Rishi Sunak even reach the Ides of March? It's all coming up over the next 2 hours here on the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
That Colonel Sanders, he's finger-licking good. Yes, the head of the British Army announced that Britain will have to reintroduce conscription. We had it in the 1950s, in part to take up labour shortage. Now that we've got a labour shortage in crucial sectors, I'm not sure where we're going to find the people to conscript. I'm too old to be conscripted, even in Colonel Sanders's army. The Ukrainian army, maybe people not that far off my age are being conscripted. Women are being conscripted. Pregnant women are being conscripted. But surely the British Army would turn their nose up at me. I'm not a pacifist, let me say right at the beginning. And if our country was threatened, I would myself, whatever age I was, pick up arms and would oppose the invader. I was a boy soldier. I passed my Part 1, unlike Lord George Robertson, who then went on to become Defence Secretary, head of NATO, and is now warning that if we don't beat Russia and Ukraine, our enemies, he says, will dictate the course of world events. He was a boy soldier too, but he failed his Part 1. I was able to strip an SLR rifle in the dark and reassemble it. I gave serious thought as a 14-year-old to joining the Royal Marines, even went on manoeuvre with them at Poole in Dorset. So I'm not a pacifist, but I'll not be joining your army, Colonel Sanders. However finger-licking good you make war with Russia sound. And by the grace of God, I have 3 sons, and none of them will be joining your army either. I have 3 daughters, and none of them will be joining your army either. Because Russia is not our enemy. China is not our enemy. Your Prime Minister, your government, and Her Majesty's opposition, they are our enemy. They are the people who have betrayed Britain. They are the people who have failed to secure that most essential of services: peace, stability, freedom from crime, prosperity, and hope. It is the system, Colonel Sanders, that you and Mr. Shapps or Green or whatever his alias is today, who are the real enemy of the British people. Mr. Shapps promised us not one war, at least Colonel Sanders only wants us to fight one war against Russia. Mr. Green, the Defense Secretary, he says we'll have to fight 4 wars in the foreseeable future. Against Russia, against China, against Iran, and against North Korea. Maybe against all 4 of them at the same time, which you've got to admit is ambitious for a country with an armed force of 85,000 people. For a country without a steel industry at all soon, if and when Port Talbot closes. A country that has virtually no shipbuilding industry left. A country that is so industrially weakened as to be in a kind of industrial palsy from which our people are struggling to emerge, and on which Brexit has done absolutely nothing to rescue us when we had the opportunity for the first time in more than 40 years to strike out in a new direction. Automatically friends of none, automatically enemies of none. We could have been an independent country after Brexit. We could have freed ourselves from the shackles of von der Leyen and Borrell and the unelected bureaucrats who rule over us from Brussels. But no, this so-called Conservative government has completely dropped the ball on Britain's independence. They have thrown what benefits there could and should have been of Brexit all away. The wars that they have in mind to send our conscripted soldiers to, that's your son, by the way, your grandson, maybe your daughter, maybe your granddaughter. And if they're transitioning, they won't escape the call-up either. In fact, they might have a special brigade for them, maybe in the Scottish regiments. These are your children. They're talking about sending to war against hypersonically nuclear-armed Russia and China, yeah, and North Korea, and Iran. Which begs this question. I know that Mr. Shapps wouldn't know one end of a rifle from another. I know that Mr. Shapps could not fight his way out of a wet paper bag. In fact, getting on as I am, nearly 70, I'd fight Grant Shapps myself. Let's do it, Grant. Let's do 3 rounds for service charities. Heaven knows our servicemen need it. They're begging on the streets of London, soldiers in distress. So Grant Shapps doesn't know one end of a rifle from another, but I presume that Colonel Sanders, who led our retreat from Basra and led our retreat from the Helmand province, in both theatres of war, we scuttled out defeated by the local resistance. But that notwithstanding, he got a knighthood. He knows, presumably, one end of a rifle from another. And so he knows this, that there would not even be time for our conscripted sons and grandsons to get on a train for Lithuania or Latvia or whatever other hellhole in the Baltics he would be sending them to for this war. There would not be enough time for them to reach there by train before our war with Russia turned nuclear. Now, it was pointed out just the other day that this war with Russia, that a NATO general, a member of the general staff of NATO, says is definitely coming within 20 years. And he gave some helpful tips. He advised everyone to get a flashlight and make sure there are spare batteries. Although if the war doesn't come to the upper end of his predicted timescale, 20 years, the batteries might be flat by then. He really did say that. Make sure you've got a flashlight and batteries, and presumably some tins of beans. and presumably a cupboard under the stairs in which to shelter. But the truth is, as anyone who has seen Oppenheimer, which deservedly is sweeping the boards in the awards ceremonies, anyone who has seen it, and anyone who's done the maths, that today's nuclear weapons are 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic weapon developed at Los Alamos by Mr. Oppenheimer, knows that neither a cupboard under the stairs or a flashlight or a conscripted dad's army is going to do anybody any bit of good if we go to war with Russia. Because Russia is bristling with intercontinental ballistic nuclear missiles. Do you really think it isn't going to use them? Do you really think that in a war with NATO, that nuclear weapons will not quickly be deployed as soon as one side begins to gain an advantage over the other? Because if you think that, you are a fool. Do you think Russia's going to allow itself to be overrun by an army commanded by ColSanders and Grant Shapps, while sitting on top of its nuclear arsenal, able to wipe out all of its adversaries in an instant? If you think that, you are a fool. So what is all this talk about conscription about? Are these hastily conscripted, poorly trained, poorly armed, bloody infantry going to get on board our aircraft carriers stuck together with glue? Our warships that crash into each other on active service? Are they going to join this army that would comfortably fit into Aston Villa's football ground and go and fight Russia? Or, as Shapps says, Russia and China and Iran and North Korea? Are we led by maniacs, lunatics, or criminals who are softening us up for something else? Is the war psychosis they are seeking to generate a diversion from the utter, absolute failure? Somebody wrote to me the other day, I regarded it as a joke. Maybe, he said, they're getting ready to form a national government and cancel the British general election. I laughed. I thought it was totally absurd. But I'm not laughing now. Something is up. These lunatics are up to something, and they are in charge of our asylum. Mind you, the anti-war movement is in a parlous state also. You'll recall I reported at some length on Sunday how I and my colleague Chris Williamson, the former MP, Corbynite extraordinaire, had both been banned from speaking on a platform with the aforementioned Mr. Corbyn at a march that we and our families were on in the bitter cold in Birmingham on Saturday. You'll recall that later in the show on Sunday, somebody phoned up and said, good news, they've begun to retreat. They've said that we can now start attending their planning meetings, which they had made a big thing out of, saying we had never attended, though we had never been invited, knew nothing of their planning meetings. Well, they're having a debate tonight about my views on immigration before deciding whether to allow us into their fold. Now, I have dilated on my views on immigration many times, and I'm very happy to do so, but not tonight. Because what do I have to answer to a group of Toy Town Trotskyists about my views on immigration? I am an immigrant. I am the grandson of Irish immigrants. My wife is Indonesian. I'm the father of 5 mixed-race children. More people of colour in Britain have voted for me in parliamentary elections than any other politician in all the history of democracy in these islands. Do you really think I'm going to answer to the Birmingham Stop the War Coalition? To the Birmingham Palestine Solidarity Campaign about my views on immigration? Seriously? But here's the bigger question. What do my views on immigration have to do with my support for the demand for a ceasefire now in Gaza? What's the connection between these two things? Are you only welcome on a march demanding a ceasefire in Gaza if you tick all the other boxes too? Boxes drawn up by these Toy Town revolutionaries? If you don't pass the political, ideological blood test, you're not wanted on this voyage? What kind of solidarity movement would that be? It would by definition be one self-limiting to those it already agrees with a no-entry sign for those on other issues that they don't already agree with. I'll keep you posted on the outcome of their debate this evening. But frankly, if that's their attitude, I say we need a new anti-war coalition. No to NATO. No to conscription. No to war. And whatever your views on climate change, on trans rights, on immigration, on the climate question, on any of these matters, whatever your views, if you agree with no to NATO, no to conscription, and no to war, you're welcome in our anti-war coalition. It's common sense, really. And I think the time has come for that. Now, there's so much to discuss this evening. Like depraved, crazed hyenas, the European colonial coalition of Canada, United States, Britain, the Netherlands were attacking poor Yemen, the poorest country in the Middle East, one of the poorest countries in the world. We were bombing it all week. The Royal Air Force alone, which has been bombing Yemen since the first year of the Royal Air Force's existence. Yes, more than 100 years we've been bombing Yemen. And we were at it again this week. The Royal Air Force alone fired 4 Sidewinder missiles costing £200,000 each. £800,000 was burned in an instant, presumably setting fire to people and property in Sana'a, the capital of Yemen. There was no parliamentary debate. There was no parliamentary approval. There was no national discussion. There was only the order to fire against the people of Yemen. For what? Because the Yemenis, without killing a single person, tried to bring an end to the genocide in Gaza by saying that no ship can go from or to the genocidal state of Israel through the Red Sea. We ought to have been giving them an award. Instead, we gave them 4 Sidewinder missiles. That's the cost of the missiles alone. The cost of the aeroplanes, the mission, is, of course, in the millions. And speaking of that genocide, on Friday, we will get the verdict of the International Court of Justice. On trial is Israel, our closest ally, for whom we're prepared to spend any money, to give any guns, to provide any diplomatic and political cover, to give an ocean of favorable press and broadcasting coverage to invert the very meaning of the words of our wonderful English language in order to defend and protect. We don't know what the verdict will be, but they're getting the band back together because Germany, France, Britain, and the United States have already declared that they will not accept a guilty verdict. It's the rules-based take your pick policy. The rules-based take your pick order. And we take our pick. Russia bad, Israel good. Ukraine murders old age pensioners in the snow in Donetsk. Don't even report it. Ukraine shoots down an airliner full of its own prisoners of war being flown to a prisoner exchange. Don't even mention it. That's the rules-based take your pick order. And if you think my sons are going to war to defend that, you have got another think coming. Stay tuned. It's the mother of all talk shows. As the green smoke rose, their faces flashed out, pallid green, and faded again as it vanished. Then slowly the hissing passed into a humming, into a long, loud, droning noise. Suddenly, a humped shape rose out of the pit, and the ghost of a beam of light seemed to flicker out after it. Forthwith, flashes of actual flame, a bright glare leaping from one to another, sprang from the scattered group of men. It was as if some invisible jet impinged upon them and flashed into white flame. It was as if each man were suddenly and momentarily turned to fire. That's me reading on my Patreon page, patreon.com/George Galloway. I've been doing a lot of interacting with my Patreon supporters this very week. I've been talking every day to them on the chat function on that. So in addition to all the other things you get, you can have a personal chat with me. Patreon.com/George Galloway. It'll cost you less than the price of a cup of tea in an insalubrious cafe per week to support the work that I am doing. So if you think I'm worth it at the end of this show tonight, please sign up. Patreon.com/George Galloway. We've got a poll running. Who will be Donald Trump's presidential running mate as he's running away with the Republican nomination? Will it be Ron DeSantis, first out, Nikki Haley, who'll be out momentarily, or my pick? My suggestion seems to be the most popular one. Why not have Tucker Carlson as your running mate, Donald? You'd sweep the country. You can vote on my Telegram, on my Twitter feed, on the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. If you're watching on the YouTube stream, please share with every one of your contacts. Please subscribe. please like the show and press the bell so that you know when I am broadcasting. Phone numbers if you want to respond. If you're in the US or Canada, it's toll free, remember, +1 844 944 3344. If you're in the UK or Ireland, equally free of charge, 0808 196 5522. If you're in the rest of the world, as I am myself, it's 0044 203 966 2625. Yasser Almohallil is a Yemeni diplomat of note. And as it seems to be the policy of Western media and the Western political class to pretend that the Yemenis don't have a point of view, and in any case don't have anyone who can enunciate it, so best not have them on. Let's just treat them as inanimate objects to be bombed and strafed and rocketed and missiled. We thought it was time to give the Yemenis a say. Excellency, thank you for joining us on the mother of all talk shows tonight. I was talking earlier about the fact that Britain has been killing Yemenis not only as long as I've been alive, and that's definitely true, but actually the Royal Air Force was bombing Yemen from the first year that it existed. That's quite an accolade. What exactly have you done to harm the British?
Yes, Mr. George, first of all, let me just thank you for having me on your show, and thanks to your audience. Actually, as you know, Yemeni people have suffered for almost 9 years since the war against Yemen started. So it's not the beginning of the UK and the US pumping of Yemen. Actually, they used to pump Yemen throughout their allies, or their puppets, their tools, as we can say about. Through the Saudis, through the Emiratis, but now they are directly engaging in a battle against people and directly bombing our territories and kill our people. Of course, it's in their perspective, they are always, acting or playing the role of the hero who saves lives, who saves humanitarian lives, who protect the principles and the democracy around the world, which in fact, they are just acting aggressively against our people, just like they do with the other nations. First of all, when we started this battle against the Israeli ships in the Red Sea, to be honest, Mr. George, our position was, we got engaged in this battle from a humanitarian standpoint. We didn't engage in this battle because we want to harm others, or we want to just, we wish to bring a crisis or a new crisis to our people who are suffering from starvation, sick, and a war against them since 9 years from 2015. But when we watched, all of the world have been watching this slaughter and these crimes and this genocide against the people of Palestine, we have been in such a situation. We cannot just stand silent and do nothing towards this genocide against the Palestinian people. So our leader stood up, our people stood up. You can see millions of Yemenis are protesting the streets every week. Or every Friday, they go out to the streets and just, demonstrating their rights of defending the oppressed people of Palestine. And this is the main point. We are just acting as a human. We don't want crisis in the region, but what's happening in Palestine is actually, we cannot just, keep silent for what's happening in there. So we have some choices. We started launching some ballistic missiles and drones and manned drones towards Eilat, the occupied Eilat port. Some of other choices we had in the Red Sea to prevent all the Israeli ships navigating in the Red Sea and in the Arabian Sea. But what did the US and the UK do? And instead of going to the Israelis to stop their genocide, they decided to wage another war against the people of Yemen. So what we are doing is coming from a humanitarian perspective. What they are doing is aggression against our people and our nation. They prefer the war rather than going to stop this genocide. They came from overseas. They came from like thousands of miles to protect the Israelis, to support the Israelis, to support genocide, just against the Geneva Convention, the Genocide Convention, the humanitarian international law. They just, violate every single humanitarian law that has been written and drawn in the United Nations. And also within the Security Council, they voted against the ceasefire, like the US did. And now they just don't want us to step up and do something for the Palestinian people. This is not acceptable.
Excellency,
that's why the tension is aggravating.
Yeah, I get that, and of course understand every word. What exactly are they doing with these raids? How often are they now bombing? And what damage are they doing to the people and property of an already war-ravaged country?
Well, actually, launching an attacks to another country, like they are doing now to our country, is a breaching for the international law. This is the first thing we should know. The second thing, actually, the damage of their bombing is not that extensive because the spots they are attacking. Places that have been bombed before by the Saudis and the United Arab Emirates. There is nothing new. And they claim that they are decreasing the capabilities of Ansarullah and the Yemeni army. And this is not also true. They killed some of our troops, some of our soldiers. 15 soldiers now have been killed by the raids of the United States and the UK, and this is not going to be passing unpunished or unanswered, of course. We will answer these attacks against our people and our territory. We didn't want, actually, the crisis to come to this far because the United States care for nothing but to protect the Israelis. But our people's blood is so precious. We cannot just stand and let them kill our people and just preach our sovereignty without doing anything in return. No. Before these attacks, Mr. George, the American ships, the UK ships were not a target. Now they are trying to put like a red line limit. Now they are actually broke all red line limits in front of our army forces. So now, what wasn't a target before is now a target. Why did they bring this to themselves? I don't just get it. Maybe is it more valuable to protect the Israeli ships than to stop the genocide in Palestine? No, this is not what we are aware of. What the U.S. policy is trying to show to the world. They are so brutal. They're so crucial, Mr. George. They care for nothing but to protect the genocide committer, the killer, the criminal. But when it comes to the people, and just act positively towards these oppressed people, they come and bomb their land and their country. They try to kill as many as they can of civilians of my country, but we are used to this aggressive act from the United States and the UK. They have been supporting, subsidizing, and giving all kind of weapons to the Saudis and the Emiratis to kill our people. And that during the last 9 years. Now, it's not going to be changed this way. What matters the most is the humanitarian lives today. And if they don't stop the genocide in Gaza, the tension in the Red Sea and the Arabian Sea is going to just be increased to which levels we cannot know actually. But what happened today, for example, if you heard the statement of the spokesperson of the forces, yesterday and the day before, they were targeting the ships, the Martian ships, and the vessels of the Israeli ships and the U.S. ships. Today there were clashes between the Yemeni armed forces and the warships of the United States of America. It lasted for 2 hours, clashes for 2 hours. So the thing is that it's getting up and up. It's not getting de-escalated. If they are claiming or they want to lie to their people that they are, just de-escalating the conflict and they are just decreasing the capabilities of Ansarullah and the Yemeni army, they are lying. And I'm telling the Western people, the American people, the UK people, but throughout your window, Mr. George, are lying to you. Nothing is happening as much as you can know from our side. This is what's happening in the Red Sea, in the Arabian Sea is different. Is more different than what the politicians are telling you. The worst is coming up, and if you don't put pressure to your politicians to withdraw from the Red Sea and the Arab Sea, maybe some harmful tensions are coming to be worse in the coming days. And we don't know until where it's going to be.
Well, the declared purpose of the mission is to degrade and diminish the fighting capability of the Yemeni people. But in truth, it is we who are being degraded and diminished by our involvement in this dirty, sordid affair on behalf of the genocidal state of Israel. Excellency, thank you for joining us. We'll regularly feature Yemeni voices as long as this crisis continues. Thanks for being on the mother of all talk shows. Thank you so much. Who will be Donald Trump's presidential running mate? You decide. It looks like Tucker got the gig, as I suggested he should not a week or so ago. Let me take a quick break and I'll be right back.
A new dawn has broken, has it not?
He had that Clinton thing. His eyes were round and big and smiley, and he was very charming.
He became this incredible pop idol kind of prime minister.
I think most people who have dealt with me think I'm a pretty straight sort of guy, and I am.
New Labour was backed by the most powerful media interests because they realised he was representing them.
He was caught red-handed trading policy in return for hard cash from a businessman.
America has no truer friend than Great Britain.
Both Bush as well as Tony Blair are now wanting to plunge the world into a holocaust.
JP Morgan paid him off for the Iraq war. The man is a war criminal.
Is Tony Blair a war criminal? In my opinion, yes.
Most definitely.
The pursuit of money has become the dominant theme in your life.
All these relationships are, in most people's estimation, corrupt relationships.
No previous Labour Prime Minister has behaved in this shameful, money-grubbing way.
How do you sleep at night? It's that. It's as a person.
Now, if you support me on Patreon, you get that film absolutely free, The Killings of Tony Blair, and my other film, Killing Kelly, patreon.com/George Galloway. Why not watch these films for free? Now, who will be Donald Trump's presidential running mate? You can vote on Telegram, on my Twitter, on the YouTube community poll, and on the YouTube stream. So far, Carlson's got 64%, 59%, 66%, and 68%. And Nikki Haley is dreadfully far behind. Let me read some comments from the USA. Benny Hill says, "Dear Biden, whack-a-mole ain't working." End of message. And Sheila Campbell says, "We surely can't allow this situation to continue without making it the people's business to intervene. The government is hired to govern, not fight." And Jack Klugman, brilliant name, "I saw where all this was going when they beat down NATO meeting protesters in 2014 here in Chicago, like 68. Fascism is your future." And OAD Gent says conscripts will be allowed to keep blue hair. It might be mandatory. John O'Rourke says Trump will choose that Vivek geek Jude. My good friend Manila Chan, my former colleague and good friend of mine, she's hearing from insiders that Trump's going for somebody called Tim Scott. I've never heard of him either. Jake's on the line from Golders Green on Palestine. Jake, what would you like to say?
Evening, George. I heard the guest you had on last week, and I don't normally listen to your show, to be honest, but I thought, how sick do you have to say that the jury is still out as to what happened on October 7th? If you look at it, there's hours and hours of footage that's been put out there. Hamas burning children, running around, massacring civilians. I mean, is that something you'd agree with, that the jury's still out on that? Because to me, it seems to be a sort of new form. Luckily, you can go back and watch. You don't normally watch my show, you said, but you can watch that, can't you? You can watch what I said right after it. But I'll give you a précis. This was a concentration camp breakout, and ugly things happen in prison breakouts, concentration camp breakouts, even more so. When the Warsaw Ghetto rose up against its oppressors and its potential murderers, potential genociders, I have no doubt that there were grievous scenes of violence, because that's what happens, you see. When you lock people up in a concentration camp for well over half a century, when they are able to break out, grievous scenes of violence will occur. However, what you clearly have not been reviewing is the ongoing revelations in the Israeli media that a substantial number of the people killed on October 7th were killed not by Hamas, but by the Israeli armed forces themselves, as part of a deliberate policy called the Hannibal Directive, which was conceptualized by Benjamin Netanyahu himself, which in short requires the Israeli armed forces to kill anyone, Israeli or Palestinian, involved in a hostage-taking situation. And that is exactly what they did. People will recall the huge car park of burned-out vehicles. And they were led to believe, perhaps you do believe, that these vehicles were burned out by Hamas fighters. It turns out they were all burned out by Israeli Apache helicopters, firing rockets from the air. People will recall in the kibbutz, the one that suffered most, the destroyed houses. And some may have wondered how lightly armed Palestinian resistance fighters could possibly have done that much damage to civilian houses, until they later learned, thanks to the Israeli media, that these houses were destroyed not by Hamas, but by Israeli tank fire, which explains the level of destruction. Its level, house by house, and its widespread nature.
the Israeli tanks destroyed these houses full of Israeli citizens rather than allow them to be taken hostage by the Palestinians who had broken out of the concentration camp. So, Jake, troll on elsewhere and do yourself a favor. Watch the show more often. You might learn something. Viking Dave says, Tim Scott is a black Republican senator from South Carolina. Well, thank you for enlightening me. Fra's on the line in Belfast on the Birmingham protests. Go ahead, Fra.
Hiya, George. George, I just wanted to say firstly how great it was to hear and see Ronnie Cattralls last week. He's a brilliant man, and I actually have a photograph of you Wonderful. And Ronnie and Harry Reid and myself at the American University in Beirut from 2011. But George, I wanted to talk about about the censorship that you suffered in Birmingham. I mean, I personally am not surprised because I've suffered from something similar. About a decade ago, the IPSC, now that's the Irish Palestine Solidarity Campaign, a few guys in Belfast approached me to see about doing some solidarity work together. I agreed. And then 2 weeks later, we had a second meeting, and they told me that their headquarters in Dublin, they have a full-time worker there. He'd been screenshotting some of my Facebook posts. So he told them that they couldn't work with me. And when I spoke to the guy in Dublin, when I was down, he said to me, his job is to keep controversy at arm's length from the Irish Palestine Solidarity Campaign. So what he was doing as part of his full-time job was watching other Palestinian activists and what they were putting up on Facebook. So if you support Yemen, if you support Syria and its war against ISIS, if you support the people of Donetsk and Lugansk, if you support the Yemenis, the Palestine resistance, I mean, they won't touch people who have, exactly as you described, views that are not in tandem with their political message. So while I can understand they want their message to come across kind of unchallenged by those who would challenge it, you know, on the side of the right or the side of Zionism, if you prevent people who, as you say, are on the same agenda and on the same page as them when it comes to Palestine, it's just self-censorship. So what you have is a middle-class intelligentsia who don't want people... I don't consider my views to be controversial. I consider them to be my opinions based on my political analysis of what I see happening in the world. And for people to blackball you, which is what they have done to you and Chris Williamson, you mean they may as well be working for the state when they start refusing people who are maybe anti-establishment from speaking.
Of course, Fra, thanks very much for that. I don't want to spend too much time on them. I wouldn't grace them with the title intelligentsia. I can assure you the Stop the War Coalition in Birmingham and the Palestine Solidarity Campaign in Birmingham don't qualify as the intelligentsia. Middle class, for sure, but that's not the problem. They are a cabal of Trotskyites of various stripes. Socialist this, socialist that, socialist something else, and that's fine. And they no doubt work hard for the demonstrations that they put on. But you cannot proscribe anyone outside of your cabal's frame of reference. Because if you do, you're weakening the movement. And if you're weakening the movement, you're betraying the interests of the Palestinians who are being slaughtered. It is the purpose of a solidarity campaign to build the biggest and widest body of people of all political opinions behind the demand to stop the murder and massacre and genocide in Gaza. It's not rocket science. What is not obvious about that? Fra, thanks for that call. Uzi 1mm messaged the show. He said, Jake got wrecked there. Hopefully he learned something. and his views change. And more comments on the poll. Full Tilt Boogie says Tucker Carlson would be amazing, but I feel he's too much of his own person, a big personality, a threat to Donald, perhaps. Plus, we need Tucker doing what he's doing for free speech. But I'll tell you what, as well as being vice president, he could also be effectively Trump's press spokesman. And that might lose some of Trump's lunacies uttered so frequently from the podium during his last term. Timothy Fay says, even as a joke, Tucker wouldn't be a bad choice. No way Trump would ever have DeSanctimonious or Nutty Nicky as running mates. And I say this as someone who despises Trump. And Sam Seed says that sick Nikki, or Namrata, to give her her Sunday name, called for Gaza to be wiped out. Hope she gets disgraced. And Carol Hope says the UK Navy can't even steer a boat. Michael's on the line in Belfast. Let's hear from him. Michael, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, hi, George. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Welcome.
Just a quick call, just to kind of, me and a few Palestinian activists in Belfast and a number of Palestinian families, we have came together in the last number of months to raise funds for families in Gaza. And before Christmas, we were able to raise up a number of £1,000 and get the money into Gaza to buy essentials, food, whatnot for the families. Recently, last week, we have started a GoFundMe page in Belfast, grassroots activism for Gaza, and our account has been frozen by GoFundMe, and we're actually, at the minute, we're being scrutinised, our bank details, and the money that we have got from like people in the community, and their money is being frozen. And I just wanted to highlight this by GoFundMe. Now, there's other accounts for once you log on to GoFundMe, there's accounts directly to fund Ukraine. But when it comes to Palestine, everything's scrutinised, and our accounts currently, the money that we have for families living in Gaza and the genocide, our accounts are frozen. And we can't get...
Well, that's not an unfamiliar experience, even to me personally. I wouldn't myself go or use any of these funding mechanisms because the road is littered with decisions made by different companies to freeze, seize, send back money that was intended for causes of which they don't approve. But GoFundMe are not able to respond to the points that you've made, of course, but they're welcome to come on the show and give their side of the story. Thanks, Michael, for highlighting that. Pietro is in New York, but on Palestine, it's the Global University of the Airwaves here. Pietro, go ahead.
Hey, George, thank you for having me. I want to talk about the hypocrisy of I don't know, can you hear me, by the way?
Yes, very clear. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to talk about the hypocrisy of the so-called West, and also not just the silent, like usually, even like the voices that would usually be like, even Hollywood actors, right? George Clooney, he's usually vocal about things like this, right? And I can list off many names. I mean, these people are just as complicit, the silence, right? But there's also this unholy alliances that have emerged, right? We have, I don't know if you're active on Twitter, X, whatever, and we have the American, Christian, pro-life conservatives siding with Israel as it's given Palestinian women abortions from the sky with surgical precision, pun intended, okay? But guess who's pro-Palestine? The alt-right. The alt-right have become pro-Palestine. I'm just glad they're not discussing trans women for once. At least. But anyway,
well, I'll tell you what, Jake. There's a number Pietro, there's a number of great paradoxes that you have raised there. One Hollywood star, John Cusack, an Irish American, has been daily, practically hourly, standing up for the Palestinians in Gaza. And there are others, Mark Ruffalo, the celebrated director, Susan Sarandon, the great Hollywood actress, but not that many more. Most of the people that would ordinarily be out for justice are strangely missing in action or inaction on this question. There is a phenomenon called PEP, Progressive Except Palestine. And I'm afraid that that afflicts a huge number of people. Now, you mentioned the issue of pro-life. There's been a 300% increase in miscarriages in Gaza. There are 50,000 pregnant women in Gaza. 70% of the nearly 30,000 people who've been killed in 105 days, 70% of them have been women and children. Women have no toilets, never mind separate toilets. Women have no sanitary ware. Women have no ability to manage their pregnancies. Women are having cesarean births without anesthetic. Can you imagine that? Women's lives have been reduced to utter misery. Millions of people in Gaza have been returned to some Old Testament biblical age of famine and flood and pestilence and disease and mass murder, and the women are on the worst end of that carnage. But there's been more protest from the Pussy Hat Brigade about the woman from Barbie not getting an Oscar nomination than there has been for the plight of these women over the last 105 days, led by, late this afternoon, the Pussy Hat in Chief, Hillary Clinton. She's up in arms about this insult to women of the Barbie actress not getting a nomination in the Oscars. But she doesn't have jack to say about the murder of women, the murder of their children, the utter destitution to which women and children have been reduced in Gaza. Go figure, Pietro. Grizzly Dave is in Canada, in British Columbia, on Palestine. Go ahead, Grizzly Dave.
Hi, George. I'd like to call to thank you for speaking up for people who have literally been thrown under the bus for the last 75 years. I found out I'm an Irishman 2 years ago. I'm actually a Rooney.
Congratulations.
My adoptive name is Matthews. That family that adopted me was related to Father Matthew, who they have the statue in Cork. And my father was a veteran. He would not fight for Canada today. He passed quite a while ago. But my adopted father told me before he left that he would not fight for these Nazis. He would fight against Nazis.
Well, that's it. Yeah, I mean, and we're not pacifists, Dave. I would stand and die, give my life's blood to defend my country and its people. Were they to be threatened? But they ain't threatened by the fighters in Yemen. They're not threatening us at all. The Russians are not threatening us. The Chinese are not threatening us. It's us that's threatening them and fighting against them, not the other way around. Last word to you, Dave.
George, keep up a good fight. I'm also on TikTok.
As long as God gives me breath.
I post a lot of things about Palestine on TikTok.
Okay, we'll check you out. Grizzly Dave, thanks very much for the call. Coming up after the break is one of my very favorite people in the whole world. It is the one and only Katie Halper. You don't want to miss her. Stay tuned.
George, I'm just looking at another dimension in this Gaza war conflict. Could this be a religious conflict in the guise of it's not Islam versus Christianity versus Judaism, but an ideology, a Zionist ideology in establishing their leader that is supposed to come in the future, and they will then govern and rule?
It's in their ideology, for sure. The Zionists are no more and no less than a nationalist ideology. They have nothing whatsoever to do with religion. Anybody who thinks Netanyahu is religious hasn't looked too closely into his private life. These people are extreme nationalists, exceptionalists. Some Americans believe in American exceptionalism. Zionists believe in Jewish exceptionalism. Nobody, in truth, is exceptional. There's nothing religious about it. It's about land. It's about nationalist supremacy, ethno-religious supremacy on the land of Palestine. And the Europeans colonized Palestine in the same way that the Europeans colonized South Africa. So fitting. The victims of white European colonialism are coming to the aid of other victims of white European colonialism. And they're doing the whole world a signal service.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
So the poll tonight, who will be Donald Trump's presidential running mate? Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, or Tucker Carlson? You have your say. In fact, why don't we ask as the first question to the one and only Katie Halper, who joins us now, host of the Katie Halper Show and co-host of Useful Idiots. I can think of a few guests that you might have on Useful Idiots, Katie. Lovely to see you again. Who will be Donald Trump's running mate, do you think?
Honestly, I have no idea. I mean, the Republicans are so pathetic that it'll probably be someone who is, as usual, criticized him rightfully, but the Republicans are such spineless hypocrites that it's actually quite amusing seeing the people who Trump has humiliated and who tried to insult Trump then line up, kind of throw themselves at his feet once they drop out of the race themselves. So who knows?
Yeah,
what
I mean, he won last night. He won last night in New Hampshire, though plenty of Democrats voted for his rival, Nikki Haley. She's been built up by the media as papabile, as presidential, in the way that Ron DeSantis briefly was. But both of them have fallen by the wayside. The nomination is Trump's already, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that all of the nominees, potential nominees, all the candidates are very scary. But I actually think that Haley is probably the scariest because she's the most neoconish. And she's, unlike Trump, she's a fairly competent administrator.
Now, I was mentioning with a caller just before you came on air, there's been more outrage amongst the glitterati, the chatterati, about the failure of the Academy to recognize fully or suitably, appropriately, the female star of Barbie, than there has been about the fact that nearly 30,000 people have been killed in Gaza and that 70% of them have been women and children. And the lives of women in Gaza, in particular, have been reduced to a state of absolute destitution. and I was telling the caller about this phenomenon called PEP, Progressive Except Palestine. It's particularly true, isn't it, amongst liberal sectors of the United States?
Well, I think here we see something called FEP, which I just thought of, which is Feminists Except Palestine. So you do have PEP, which is Progressive Except for on Palestine. But you actually, I was listening to you discussing this outcry from people like Hillary Clinton about the director and actress from, or actor, I should say, from Barbie being snubbed by the Oscars. And I actually was inspired by your analysis. So I tweeted out, I quote tweeted Hillary's tweet. Hillary tweeted, "Greta and Margot, while it can sting to win the box office but not take home the gold, your millions of fans love you. You're both so much more than enough," which is a joke about Ken from Barbie. So I quote tweeted that, and I said, "Any room in your feminism for the women in Palestine being massacred, having C-sections without anesthesia, miscarrying because their hospitals have been bombed, using tent scraps as sanitary napkins, or no?" We'll see if she responds.
Yeah.
But that's,
well, I doubt if she will, but it is something striking. There are so many paradoxes, aren't there? The people who used to be left are now right. They are fans of the FBI and the CIA and the so-called justice system. They're trying to Shanghai my friend Julian Assange and lock him away in a supermax. They are up for war here, there, and everywhere. And the people on the right that said they were America first turn out to be Israel first, before America. And so who does that leave, Katie?
Yeah, I think it's a really disgusting bipartisan consensus that we're seeing around Israel, where there is a shared dehumanization of Palestinian life. We see Republicans and Democrats agreeing that ethnocracy and theocracy and settler colonialism should be defended, and Palestinians should be discarded and genocided. And what's interesting is that so many of the people, including the prime minister of Israel himself, Netanyahu, we know that these people couldn't care less about Palestinian lives, that they hold them in contempt. But what's interesting is that they claim to be motivated by a desire to save Jewish life and Jewish lives. And they don't even care about that, because, of course, if they cared about the hostages, they'd stop the bombing. Not only are they refusing to engage in negotiations, which would, of course, lead to the release of hostages, but they're actually bombing them themselves. And as you alluded to earlier in the show, we now know that Israel, it wasn't just friendly, not just through friendly fire, but through a new version of the Hannibal Directive, they chose to kill some of these people who were being held by Hamas. So this is not even about saving Jewish lives. It's not even about their racist vision. It's actually, their racist vision is one that prioritizes killing Palestinians over saving Jewish lives.
The one ray of sunshine, or one of the few rays of sunshine from the United States and here in Britain, I don't know if it's true elsewhere in Europe, because I don't know those communities as well, but I'd be surprised if it isn't, is the number and the vivacity of and youthfulness of those Jewish activists standing up for Palestinian rights, opposing Israel. And you're one of the most significant voices in that, but there's a whole new generation. Of course, you're still very young, Katie, I don't mean to imply otherwise, but there's people even younger than you who are now appearing, emerging as leaders, as talkers, as interviewees. It's a wonderful sight to behold, isn't it?
It is. That is something that's very inspiring to see. I mean, you have people who, I think, Israel is so blatant because thanks to social media, we're seeing Israel's genocide in real time. And it's a lot harder for people to cover up Israel's crimes. It's a lot harder for Israel to cover up its own crimes. So what you have is you have younger people who haven't been as indoctrinated with pro-Israel propaganda, who are seeing Israel for what it is. which is a real genocidal nation. I mean, it's absolutely, it's not an exaggeration to say that what they're doing is genocide. And of course, for Jews like me, the takeaway of the Holocaust is not never again for Jews, but yeah, totally again for other people. It's never again for anyone. I mean, how can people who care about the Holocaust look at these images of what's happening now and not be moved to act in defense of Palestinians and move to criticize Israel? That's the takeaway from the Holocaust. If you are a student of history, you should be up in arms about this. If not, you're just a racist Jewish supremacist who doesn't care about human beings unless they're Jewish, which is not the Jewish tradition that I come from.
But it is the prevalent ethos in the state of Israel today, by all accounts. The great majority of Israeli citizens, there are some of the bravest people on the planet in Israel opposing it, but the great majority of Israelis are one brand of Netanyahuism or other, including many of the people who want rid of Netanyahu in order to put somebody even worse, if that's imaginable, in his place. But one of and Haaretz made this point today. I'm an avid reader of Haaretz, the best, it doesn't mean it's good, but the best newspaper in Israel. They made this point today that someone's going to have to get a grip of the Israeli armed forces in Gaza before they become lawless gangs. He might have said after they have become lawless gangs, but they're putting their crimes on TikTok, Katie. They dedicate the explosion of people's houses that they're about to make, they dedicate it to their wife on TikTok before pressing the handle and blowing up somebody's house. I mean, talk about self-incrimination. If the court doesn't have enough for Friday, they just have to look at TikTok any other day.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one thing I will point out, speaking of Israeli opposition, you're right that sadly, even among the people who are mad at Netanyahu, they still support using force, the kind of force he's using against the people of Gaza and against Palestinians in general. But there were some family members of the hostages who actually stormed Parliament the other day and demanded that the government engage in negotiations. And they said, what if it was your children? And of course, Netanyahu doesn't care because he's extending this genocide to extend his own political life. But I think that, you know, in terms of broadcasting their crimes, that is what happens when you live in a society. You know, Gideon Levy, who is a Haaretz journalist, Israeli, has said that there are three things that let the Israelis live with the occupation. One of them is thinking they're the chosen people. The other one is thinking that they're victims who can do no wrong. And the third one is the dehumanization of Palestinians. And we see that loud and clear right here, which is the fact that they don't even have the wherewithal or the awareness to hide their crimes because they're living in a society where the dehumanization of Palestinians is so built into it. It's like, you know, a fish doesn't know it's in water. These people don't know they're in such an environment of such hatred of Palestinians. And, you know, just today, I believe was, or yesterday, you had a man in Gaza who was giving an interview to a cameraman for a British channel, ITV. And he gave an interview and he was talking about how he was unable to get some of his family out who wanted to evacuate. They were trying to follow Israel's orders, and they shot him. They shot this man right after the Israeli forces shot him right after he gave this interview to ITV. His name is Ramzi Abu Salul, and he's with other men, one of whom is carrying a white flag. There's a cameraman because there's an interview with him. He does the interview, and right after, Israeli forces open fire, shooting at these men who are unarmed, one of whom is carrying a white flag, and he's killed. And you see them carrying his body, covering it with a white flag that becomes covered in, you know, the white flag turns red as he's bleeding out. And again, this is something we saw Israelis kill their own citizens. We saw Israelis kill hostages who had white flags, who were shirtless, running away, speaking to them in Hebrew. So obviously these people, if they're going to kill Israelis, they won't think twice about killing Palestinians.
What are you expecting from Friday's judgment in The Hague, Katie?
I'm honestly not sure. I had a show on this on the Katie Halper show. I interviewed Muin Rabbani and Norman Finkelstein. And, you know, there are a bunch of different options. They could say that there is a plausible case, but they may not make the recommendations for a ceasefire. I think we'll have to see. I do think that regardless of the outcome, people should be encouraged by South Africa's bravery. You know, they did this at great political risk, and they're not gaining anything from this. So I think no matter what happens, people should be grateful to South Africa. And also, it's an unprecedented moment. Being able to bring this case to the ICJ in itself is an important moment. But, you know, what's unbelievable is I had on Craig McIver, who is this UN official, human rights lawyer who resigned over the UN's failure to deal with Gaza appropriately. And he says that usually when you're making a genocide case against someone or a nation, you have to like spend all this time going through files and in the archives and looking for evidence of genocidal intent. But in this case, the genocidal intent is so clear. I mean, anyone can see it. Anyone who says the intent isn't there is just lying. The only way you can defend Israel is by saying it's justified. But there are some people who will say that, who says, but yeah, sure, we should exterminate them all. But most people will pretend that it's not genocide, which just exposes them. Basically, anyone saying that there's no genocide in Palestine of the Palestinian people is either ignorant or a liar. Either way, they should be not taken seriously.
Now, Britain, Germany, France, and the United States, they're getting the old band back together. Right. They have already declared that they will not accept a verdict of guilty from the ICJ. This is the rules-based order, the rules-based pick and mix order. That will do grave damage to their governments amongst their own public opinion and lay them open to legal action from their own citizens, won't it?
I mean, I hope that would be a great outcome. I'm not sure. It's depressing how much the Western powers get away with their crimes. So it would be a very welcome outcome, but we'll have to see what happens.
Here's some good press for you. Landrew says, if you haven't watched Norman Finkelstein on Katie's show, do. I can only imagine it must have been terrific. Norman's a great guest and you're a great host. And Gilbert says, well done, George. I'm impressed by your choice of this guest. What a lovely, intelligent girl. It brings out your faith in fellow human beings. She's really cheered me up. Great show.
Oh,
Keep
thanks.
it up. That's encouraging, Katie.
Yeah.
How is your show doing and where can people find it?
YouTube.com/The Katie Halper Show. You can also find it at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. You can also hear it on as a podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. I also co-host Useful Idiots with Aaron Mate. And yes, since October 7th, we've been focusing on this issue because there's so much propaganda around it. And we brought on Palestinian guests, Noura Erakat, Muin Rabbani, Ali Abu Nima. We also have brought on Jewish guests from Jewish Voice for Peace, brought on human rights voices like Craig McIver. Next week, I'm speaking to one of the college students who was sprayed at Columbia University with skunk, with a toxic chemical. These people were protesting at Columbia and they were sprayed by people. And of course, Columbia hasn't done anything about it. You can only imagine what would have happened if the people doing the spraying, instead of being pro-Israel, were pro-Palestine. I mean, they'd be locked up already and they would have been dragged away in handcuffs right away. But yeah, so I think it's really important to focus on this issue. Also, Yamna Patel, who's great. She's a Mondo Weiss journalist usually based in the West Bank. And of course, we should mention that there was a Palestinian American 17-year-old who was killed in the West Bank by Israeli forces. He's from Louisiana. And he moved to Palestine in May, and he's was killed. And his father said, you know, this is what Americans are funding, and how many mothers and fathers need to lose their children before this stops? And that really is a question I asked to everyone who's defending what Israel is doing. How many Palestinians need to die? How many Palestinians need to be murdered before you're satiated, before you're satisfied? Those of you who keep invoking but Hamas, but October 7th, what do you think you're doing? First of all, you think you're creating more fans of Israel? But besides that, how many kids is it acceptable to be killed? Over 25,000 people have been killed. The majority of them women and children, as you pointed out. And, you know, Tawfiq Hafez Ajak is just the latest Palestinian American casualty, the 17-year-old American student from Louisiana who was killed. And yeah, his father said, how many fathers and mothers have to say goodbye to their children? How many more?
Yeah. The way I read it in the American press was that he wasn't killed, he died. And a bullet somehow found its way into him.
Right.
And
yeah, he
all
got
of the British
he
media,
ran into a bullet.
He ran into a bullet. The British and American media portrayed the loss of 21 Israeli soldiers who were busily blowing up other people's houses when they were themselves blown up. This was literally reported on state broadcasters in the West as the biggest daily death toll of the war. Well, only if you consider the 200 a day Palestinians being killed, only if you consider them to be non-humans, is this the biggest daily death toll.
Right. It's almost helpful that they're saying the quiet part out loud.
Out loud, yeah. I mean, I always thought the ratio was like 10 to 1, you know, one Israeli was as valuable as 10 Palestinians, but it turns out my maths was way, way out. Katie Halper, always a delight to see you, and I hope everyone follows you on the Useful Idiots and, of course, on the one and only Katie Halper Show. Thanks for joining us. Now, a massive thank you to Lando for his $100 super chat donation just then. Thank you. Keep it up. Thanks, Lando. Let me take a quick break, and then it's your calls all the way to the end. Stay tuned.
There's a group of people in Twitter who are daily posting discussions about Gaza, Lebanon, what's happening, news updates, aid for Gaza, and trying to enlist the help of Jordan and France and any other regional entity that will help get more aid into Gaza and all of Gaza, all of Palestine, for everyone who suffers. So I want to request that everyone who is listening to this go to your local council meetings and peacefully request that their representatives at the local levels do this, because it works.
Thanks for the call, Pia, in Uruguay. I'm a free man of the city of San Francisco, awarded to me for my work on Palestine, on the steps of City Hall itself. So it was a particular delight for me that the San Francisco Council voted by 8 votes to 3 to demand a ceasefire. And that decision didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of campaigning to force the local authority representatives to vote.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
So you've got about 10 minutes left to vote. Who will be Donald Trump's presidential running mate? DeSantis, Haley, or Carlson? Tucker's anxiously awaiting the final result. The message of the night definitely goes to Jeff Plant. Hillary's more of a Klaus Barbie thing. Klaus Barbie type. Klaus Barbie, the notorious Nazi mass murderer in occupied France. Thanks, Jeff. Totally brilliant observation. comments on the Israel-Palestine conflict. Yusuf Chaka says, George, question for you. If the ICJ find Israel guilty and ask them to stop the bombardment of Gaza and they carry on, what will happen to the USA, UK, EU? Who will intervene to stop Israel? Well, Netanyahu has said that he will treat any adverse finding from the ICJ with total contempt, that they will not be stopped by having been found plausibly guilty of genocide. Imagine a state calling itself, though it's a nomenclature I reject, but calling itself the Jewish state, ignoring a finding that they have been committing genocide. But he says that he will ignore it, and I think we must take him at his word. The Germans, the French, the British, and the Americans have said that they will ignore it also. Now, that will be a much more high-risk path, as I just put to Katie Halper. I don't know what it's like in the United States, but I know for certain that in Germany, France, and the UK, and any other country that takes the same line and continues business as usual with a country that has just been found to have been committing genocide, it will be fraught with many, many difficulties, not the least of which is that thereafter, right after that judgment is returned, if it is returned, then the ministers themselves and the civil servants who implemented their orders, because I was only obeying orders was a defense that died at Nuremberg, would be liable to legal action from their own citizens. Their own citizens could say that given that we fully support the ICJ, indeed we set it up and we have judges on it, given that the ICJ has returned this verdict, to continue to supply weapons and intelligence and conduct overflights and fly munitions into an armed force that has been found to be committing genocide, well, the chances of a local criminal case succeeding would, in my view, be quite high. And at the very least, the public relations disaster of doing so or attempting to do so would be very damaging for those governments. Salo TG says Sunak and Starmer must not carry on in power, otherwise things will get worse. There was an MP in the House of Commons today called Tahir Ali. As it happens, another Birmingham MP. I don't know him, I've never heard of him. But he asked a brave question in the House of Rishi Sunak, asking whether Sunak did not consider that he had some of the blood of these Palestinians in Gaza on his own hands. It was like a bolt. Suddenly, somebody in Parliament had found the courage and found the words to say what is blindingly obvious, but which has not yet been said at all in Parliament in 105 days. And Tahir Ali said it. Except immediately afterwards, he was summoned by Keir Starmer's chief whip and ordered to apologize to the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. And guess what? He did. Imagine having the courage to say that in Parliament and being so, well, I don't want to be too cruel, lacking the moral fiber to stand by what you just said. It was a very, very sad case. I feel sad for him in his community. He could have been a hero for saying what he said. Now, I'm afraid he just looks utterly pathetic. Christine Hines says, thank you, Yemen and Africa, for standing up against the inhumanity against Palestinians. Yemen and Africa put the rest of the world to shame. Talking of Africa, let's go to Kenya and talk to Feroz in Kenya on Yemen. How's that for a global university of the airwaves? Feroz, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's good morning to you, George. I really love your show. Yeah.
Thank you.
Coming to it, I was also watching the UN sessions, right? And in the people who are in favor of Israel, the Zionist regime, they were having the same speech. Was they all given the same photocopy paper to read the same speech? Everything was the same. Everybody was repeating the same thing. Now, another thing about the women being raped. When a terrorist is going there, does he have a time to rape a woman? On all these lies which they keep on giving. I was also watching the interview of the Israeli ambassador, and she mentions that on the YouTube program that there are hundreds of kilometers of tunnels in Gaza. I think that is a big metro. Even you in London, you don't have a underground metro so big as this, isn't it? Right?
Well,
now,
it would be like the mother of all mazes, if that were true, because Gaza is only 25 miles long. 25 miles long and 4.5 miles wide. How do you get hundreds of kilometers of tunnels into that size of land? It is utter nonsense, and it is all to try to explain away their utter failure on the ground in this campaign. If Hamas are in the tunnels, why are you killing all the people on the surface? If Hamas are in tunnels, why are you destroying all these houses, all these hospitals, schools, United Nations clinics, warehouses, mosques, churches? Why are you doing that if the Palestinians are in tunnels, if the fighters are in tunnels? Why don't you get down into these tunnels and fight them like men? Well, of course, they're not doing that, and when they try to do that, they are sustaining extremely heavy losses which they, through military censorship, have managed to distort, suppress, and mislead. So, either way you dice it, if they're in hundreds of kilometers of tunnels, what's the point of massacring all these women and children on the surface? And if they're in these tunnels, why have you not killed a single leader of Hamas? Why have you not captured a single leader of Hamas? Why have you not rescued a single hostage? It's an utter, abysmal failure of the armed forces of Israel, of the intelligence services of Israel. And so they just keep on killing Pharaohs in a kind of frenzy. And of course, the easiest people to kill are not armed Hamas fighters, but women and children. Let's go to Norfolk in England, where Terence wants to ask what's going on. Go ahead, Ter.
Good evening, Mr. Galloway. First of all, we won't mention the late, great Dennis Skinner and Dodgy Dave. Mr. Ali got it wrong there today. I agree with you totally. But earlier on in your program, you said there's something going on. They're up to something. Now, I think, for me, I don't know what your take on this is. Manchester United has just been bought by the Arabs. Ratcliffe has come in with a Man City rat from Man City. Manchester's gone. Socialist is finished in Manchester. Money and business as usual is still going on. The Red Sea, they just want the oil to continue the Zionist money, greed, the infinite earth that we've got. They don't care. I'd like your take on that, please, Mr. Galloway.
Well, first of all, Manchester United was not sold to Qatar. Sheikh Jassim failed in his bid to take over Manchester United. It's still owned by the American billionaires, the Glazer brothers. A quarter of it has been bought by Jim Ratcliffe, but there's no Arab money involved in Manchester United. You mustn't confuse them with Manchester City. who are a very fine team, but may be about to be relegated to the 4th Division as a result of malpractice. Of course, the reality is that we want Arab money, we want the Shard, we want Arabs, we want Manchester City, we want Newcastle United, we want Sheffield United to be bought and paid for by Arab money. But in truth, the ruling elites and the journalists who serve them have nothing but hatred and contempt for Arabs. Nothing but hatred and contempt. They regard them as goat herds, as camel drivers, and their elite as someone whose pocket is to be picked and hopefully fooled. But the Arabs today are not the Arabs of the Lawrence of Arabia era. The Arabs today are increasingly self-confident and self-conscious. And even their rulers are beginning to shift. Hence, the ruler of Saudi Arabia has made a rapprochement with the rulers of Iran. Saudi Arabia has joined the BRICS. Saudi Arabia's ruler has excellent relations with Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, far better relations than he has with Joe Biden, whom he treats with scarcely concealed contempt. But amongst the mass of the Arabs, computer literate, internet savvy, increasingly well educated, there's a new generation of politically conscious people who know very well the double standards, the sick hypocrisy of so-called Western values. Thanks for that call. Mehran Khan sends a €50 donation. Thank you so much, Mehran Khan. Thanks, George. Great show, great guest as always. Liberal anti-Zionist Jews are a very positive phenomenon. Sadly, it's mostly a UK and US thing. For instance, it's very rare in France. Keep up the good work. Sorry to hear that, and thank you for your kind donation. Heather Fraser says, GoFundMe stopped the Canada's trucker convoys money after they made over 10 million. Said they would donate the funds to charities of their choice. Think they ended up giving the donors back their dollars. Well, the courts. You may remember a man called Kenny banned me from Canada when I was a member of Parliament. But the Canadian courts gave him a judicial caning and overturned the ban. Justin Trudeau did all kinds of crimes against the truckers and against others protesting his extremely authoritarian response to COVID. And guess what? The Canadian courts have again overturned the government and given Trudeau a judicial caning. I've heard he likes a caning, actually. Well, I'm actually reuniting with my good wife in a minute, but first let me take a call from London, where Michael wants to talk about Palestine. Go ahead, Michael.
Hello, good evening, George. I'm calling from London. I'm Palestinian roots, born and raised in London. And I'd like to say, growing up in this great city of ours, when I was at school and back in the day, nobody knew about Palestine. You had to educate people. Only certain, people who were educated in the subject know about the situation there. But it's encouraging now. I mean, one of the few things to come out of the recent events is that millions and millions of people know about the situation there. People even think of would know about it. And the mask is finally off. Finally, the mask is off, and Israel is showing its true colours to the world, which, as Palestinian people and people who supported the cause and educated about the cause, knew for years and years what they were doing. The only difference is now, anybody with a mobile phone can see exactly what they're doing, and it's becoming more and more difficult to deny it. But ultimately, George, one question I wanted to ask you, because I wanted to talk to you, ask you so many questions, but ultimately, as a Palestinian, I know the answers. One thing I want to know, and it's not Israel's ultimate end game, because we know as Palestinians Israel's ultimate end game. But what is the West's ultimate end game in this situation? What are they going to do with the 7 million people that are non-Jewish who live between the West Bank of the River Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea? Another 50 years of occupation? Surely, the world cannot stand by and let this carry on, because what other solution is there? Apart from killing every single Palestinian. I have my grandmother's house is still in the old city of Jerusalem. My mother is from the West Bank in Bethlehem. I went there last year. I encourage people to go to Bethlehem and Jerusalem to see the situation, because guaranteed, as you know, your thoughts will be changed on the subject completely. But I'd just like to know your thoughts on what the ultimate end game is. It's the longest military occupation in modern history, and people just want to live. They don't want war and this, if there's no oppression, there won't be any resistance. People just want to live there, and just go about their daily lives. What would you say would?
Well, look. First of all, Michael, that was a very beautiful and powerful call. Eminently clippable, and I'm sure it will travel far. The situation is this, that for 57 years nearly, in June it will be 57 years, the Palestinians living in territories occupied by war have lived in an apartheid state. They're under Israeli rule, military rule, but they have no rights. They have no right to vote. They have a different set of laws applicable to them, actually British mandate laws from 1948. They are ruthlessly expropriated. They are in enormous numbers imprisoned for enormous numbers of years. I know one prisoner who's been in prison for 45 years. He's the longest serving political prisoner in the world from the Barghouti family. They are disappeared, they are tortured, they are killed, their land is seized, their crops are destroyed, they've had an apartheid wall built across their land, they have separate roads which only Jewish settlers can travel on. Mary and Joseph would find it very difficult to reach Bethlehem. Today, she'd have given birth at the checkpoint outside Bethlehem. It's easier, to continue the biblical theme, for a camel to get through the eye of a needle than for Palestinians to travel between Jerusalem and Bethlehem. So the mass settlement of the area has completely changed the demography, the topography even, of these territories occupied in 1967 in June after the Six-Day War. Now, some of them balk at being called an apartheid state, but what else can you describe that as? You've got millions of people, 7 million of people, living under your rule, who have no vote, who are not citizens and have no citizens' rights, and to whom different laws apply. That's apartheid. So the idea that the Palestinians, the 50,000 babies waiting to be born in Gaza, are going to live another 50 years like that is fanciful. There'll be more and more concentration camp breakouts. There'll be more and more boycott, divestment, and sanctions by the newly awoken millions and millions of people to whom you referred, who are now absolutely clued up on the nature of Israel. And so Israel will become more and more isolated. Western politicians will find it more and more difficult to justify their policy towards Israel, their policy towards the Palestinians. So Israel has shot themselves in both feet. They have turned the whole world against them. You need to be a pretty sick individual still to be supporting the massacre of all these little children. I mean, what kind of psychopath would you have to be to continue to support that? They have ended up in front of the ICJ. They are routinely denounced by the new and rising powers in the world, in the United Nations, in all international fora. It'll be very much more difficult to declare yourself a friend of Israel after all of this. So Russia today called for an immediate ceasefire and an immediate declaration of a Palestinian state on the pre-1967 borders. That is to say, East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza. Now there's many a slip twixt cup and lip. What about all these settlements? What is East Jerusalem? How do you ensure the contiguity of the West Bank and Gaza? There would be no point in breaking it into a kind of two Bantustans. There has to be a bridge, or there has to be a tunnel. There has to be a way of moving from one to the other. Has to be international recognition. Has to be international guarantees, and so on. But that's what Putin called for today. And the Russian and Chinese positions has become increasingly firm, indeed hard. So let's talk again, Michael. Once this verdict is in, I can't let you keep me from Gayatri, but Melita Filter says it makes me sad to see the same expression on Aaron Mate and Katie Halper's face that I had when I learned what my people did to the Jewish fellow citizens. Well, no, I'm not going to wait any longer. We're thousands of miles apart, but joined by television. What's rattling, Gayatri?
Well, the news today that Britain might have to prepare for a citizen army really blew us away, and we got lots of comments on that. Actually, this is from your patron Alison Woolley, who says, "I gladly served in the British Army for 13 years. At that time, I now realize I was pretty brainwashed. Now I see the US and the UK as the world's terrorists. And I would never serve this country as it is again, nor would I allow my daughter to be conscripted, or anyone else I loved. I would fight to the death to stop them being used as cannon fodder for the sick psychopaths who have nothing but power in their minds, not peace." Which is a very powerful...
Well, can I just respond to... very powerful indeed, and I feel the same way. I know you do also. Depending on when this war happens, they're going to call up our son, at least. And depending on when it happens, maybe also our middle daughter, our middle child. So this is not a joke. This is not something, theoretical. This is the chief of the British Army declaring that there will have to be a call-up, conscription of our young people into the armed forces. Now, I made the point earlier that whoever you called up wouldn't even reach the battlefield because the war would be over and we would all be a smoking ruin by then. But it's all about armed propaganda, isn't it? It's about sensitizing our people into the belief that over there is our enemy, that we must prepare to face our enemy. We must all do it together. I mean, this is straight out of George Orwell, straight out of 1984. Yes. I'm still not clear why he said this and said it today. I suppose events will unfold that will tell us that?
Well, you obviously in the monologue mentioned the Dutch general, who also a few days ago was addressing NATO in the same vein, getting your battery packs ready, and as you said, well, what you do with a flashing, with a torch when, nuclear weapons are falling down on us, it's unbelievable. But yeah, they're just, they're mentally trying to prep the nation. But, if you can't even run the trains because of a storm, then how are you going to prep the people for a citizen army? It's ridiculous. I mean, they're completely, the level of hallucination is out of this world. More comments have come in about the ICJ. This is also from a patron. Stephanie Caro says, what if from now on, any individual being tried for a crime were to tell the court, I won't accept a guilty verdict? I mean, if states can do it, why can't individuals?
Very good point. What's the legality of setting up an international court of justice and then declaring that though you are one of the people that set it up, you're not going to accept a verdict of guilty if it's against one of your friends? What kind of justice system is that?
Exactly. So John says, in Gaza, the civilians are now the targets, while the fighters are collateral damage, which is kind of the picture that is being played out at the moment. And remember Tom Orr, who was hoping for a reckoning of a free Palestine? We were wondering about his age,
yes,
so that you could give him a more precise answer. He has come back and he says, I'm 60 now, hopefully got a few years left, but you never know. Hope the freedom I have taken for granted for all my life, the knowledge that I will see my family grow up, will be shared with our brothers and sisters in Palestine.
Amen. Of course, at 60, there's still a chance, but he better get his kids ready to go in his stead. That's what I have reconciled myself to. You can take our children to a free Palestine, and they can ask people if they remember their father. Give me one last one.
Paul Scott says, great show, George. I feel we have had the same songbook for 40 years, from Thatcher to present day. We need some sort of reformation, and we need someone like you to lead it.
Well, I'd be the last man to lead a reformation, but the truth is, he's right. Our political system is bankrupt and broken. It is utterly bereft of direction, of competence, even of basic competence. I mean, they're going to fight. They're going to have a citizens' army and fight Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea at the same time, whilst they're closing down our steel industry. How do you fight a war without steel? How do you fight a war without shipyards? How do you fight a war without your own energy being produced from your own territory? How do you do that? Have these fools any idea of what we went through as an island in the Second World War? The sacrifice of our sailors in the convoys, the Atlantic convoys, even to get bread into the country. Never mind war material. Our sailors died in their tens of thousands in the merchant navy, sailing to the New World and elsewhere to resupply our country, because we were completely surrounded. We were on an island in the middle of a world war. These people seem to lack even basic competence. Never mind morals. Yeah. Forget morals. No. Morals are definitely not us.
No.
Have you got one more? Have you got one more? No. I can't bear to let you go.
No, I just want to say that and I have been following the AFCON and the AF Asia Cup keenly, as is our son Torin. And Palestine made history this week by making it all the way through the final rounds, which is a very big big achievement for them as a sports club, and of course in the context of everything.
Amen. And they'd all be out celebrating in the streets if they weren't being bombed and murdered instead. See you Friday, God willing. Kiss the children for me, please. Thank you very much for that social media roundup. That's my good wife, Gayatri. Nizar Dasuki says, how likely will the ICJ judges vote politically? I wouldn't like to say. I'll have plenty to say on Sunday's show. Carpe Diem is in Michigan, in the United States, place I've spoken many, many times. Yes, ma'am, what would you like to say?
Hello, George. Can you hear me?
Very clearly, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. You probably already reported on this, but I need to talk about it because it's giving me nightmares. On Saturday, January 20th, 2024, there were Palestinian families sheltering in the courtyard of Kamal Adwan Hospital in northern Gaza when Israeli bulldozers came into the courtyard and rolled over their tents. It rolled over these families' tents, crushing to death 20 people. I saw the footage of the courtyard after these murders, just people frantically clawing through this mud and dirt trying to get to the bodies. The Zionists, they're not only, they slaughter the living and they torment the dead, even the dead. They have this new game now where they're digging up the buried mass graves with the explanation that they're looking for the bodies of their hostages. Okay, if God forbid you or I were looking for the body of a dead son or daughter or mother or father in a mass grave, would we do it with a bulldozer? Would we look for the body of a dead family member with a bulldozer?
That's a very, very powerful and emotional call. I'm grateful to you for making it. The scenes, I saw the Kamal Adwan scenes myself, are being replicated not just daily, but many times a day. They allowed a shipment of aid in earlier today. The people, as people in a famine situation do, rushed out in very large numbers to collect the aid. And the Israelis gave them precisely 1 minute to grab what they could and then opened fire on them, killing and wounding many. The sadism, often filmed by themselves, often TikToked by themselves, the vicious sadism that is being paraded hourly out of Gaza is unforgettable, it is unforgivable, and caused the Haaretz newspaper headline today, somebody has to get a grip of this before the army becomes a lawless gang. Well, that horse has already left the stable. It has bolted. The lawlessness, the sadistic lawlessness of these gangs, for that is what they are, operating in uniform, but gangs of terrorists, has now been seen not by millions, not even by hundreds of millions, but by billions of people around the globe. My own tweets get millions of views, just me. And if you add up the number of people who have seen all of this, including the gruesome grave robbing of which you speak, is in the billions. And you can't put a price on that. The genie is out of the bottle and will never be able to be put back in. Thank you for that wonderful call from the great state of Michigan. The legend, Norma in Bristol, is our last caller, as we always like it to be. Norma, welcome.
Hello, George. It's just a quickie, really, because there's not much time. On Saturday, it's the 27th, isn't it? The Holocaust Remembrance Day is, well, when actually millions of Jews were murdered by the Nazis. But when our leaders, they assemble and they say never again, and at the same time they're not acknowledging the genocide in Gaza, it sticks in my throat a bit, really. You know?
Yeah, it's very difficult. We must never again tolerate the annihilation of a whole people or a part of that people in the kind of genocide that we saw in the Holocaust, in which 6 million Jews perished, along with 26 million citizens and soldiers of the Soviet Union, many of whom, of course, were Jews. So there's an overlap there. Many of the Jews that were murdered in the Holocaust, particularly in the Holocaust of the East, which were murdered up close and personal in pits by the Einsatzgruppen of Hitler under the control of the SS, but actually most of the killing done by Nazi allies, foremost amongst which were the extreme Ukrainian nationalists at Babi Yar. Almost 1 million people in the Ukraine were murdered, and most of them were murdered by Ukrainians, not by Germans. But the Germans are responsible for it because it was their invasion of the Soviet Union. It was their Holocaust. We must never forget it. I am the first to say that the Holocaust against the Jews, and I draw this distinction in their favor because the purpose of the Holocaust in part was clearly to annihilate every last Jew in Europe. So although the whole of the Jewish people was not massacred, that was not for the want of trying on the part of fascism. Indeed, the triumph of the Red Army, they were all at Auschwitz the other day. Elon Musk and some scurrilous individuals were there in Auschwitz, but nobody mentioned who liberated Auschwitz. Nobody mentioned whose soldiers paid an enormous price to liberate not just Auschwitz, but to liberate Germany itself from the Nazi filth, and who caused the destruction of the beast of Berlin, Adolf Hitler. None of that was mentioned, didn't get a look in this week's conduct to Auschwitz. But the attempt to remove every last Jew from the earth, certainly from Europe, and ultimately it would have been from the earth, can never be forgotten and can never be forgiven. But how ironic that the next state up on genocide charges should be a state which lyingly calls itself the Jewish state. Katie Halper has nothing to do with that state. Neither does Aaron Maté. Neither does Max Blumenthal. Neither do hundreds of Holocaust survivors or the children of Holocaust survivors, like the aforementioned Norman Finkelstein. None of the Jews for justice, Jews for peace in America and in Britain want anything to do with this state. It is not the state of the Jews. And in any case, there are 8 million non-Jews living in it. But half of them have no rights at all, except the right regularly to be murdered. But we should commemorate the Holocaust next week, and we should be even more determined to ensure that it isn't repeated in the Gaza Strip. Now look, here's some advance notice of some importance. Wednesday's MOATS, that's the midweek MOATS, is being moved to 7 p.m. UK time. Sundays are 7 p.m., so will Wednesdays also be 7 p.m. UK time. That's from Wednesday, the 7th of February. Make a note, please, in your diaries. For logistical reasons, and from the 7th of February onwards, the Wednesday MOATS show will be the same time as the Sunday MOATS show. Well, it's been marvelous for me. I hope it was for you, and if it was, please come back on Sunday at 7 p.m. UK time for the mothership, the original mother of all talk shows, and bring another viewer with you. Why don't you? And sign up now to my Patreon if you can. Good night.